Ladies and gentlemen, Christy is wearing a t-shirt that is just as appropriate as anything. There are t-shirts I deliberately made for this show that are less appropriate than the one Christy is wearing today.
I mean, I want to say thanks as ever to Out of Print for their semi-annual buy one get one free sale. So this is how I get all the t-shirts I love. Yeah, I'm wearing a Salem's Lot t-shirt, and it was fully subconscious. I reached into my drawer, I grabbed a shirt. It's like, this one hasn't seen the light of day in a while. You know what else hasn't seen the light of day in a while? Vampires.
Stop it! Stop! Absolutely not. We're going back and restarting the episode.
Oh yeah. Should we do an intro or something?
I think the intro just took care of itself. I think that riotous joke was all we needed.
Yeah, this is a podcast called Pizza Toast, where we discuss YA novels. Usually the adaptations thereof, be they TV. Can't say words. I gotta get out of here. That joke ruined me.
You are not a friend of media today. From novels to TV, you sound like a Yakov Smirnoff set from like 1984.
Oh boy. I think it's because I'm Christy, by the way.
I'm Phil.
I think it's because I'm so disoriented by what we're planning on talking about in the coming weeks, months, years.
Forever. It's going to feel because we have worked out a plan to actually consolidate some of the episodes.
That is true.
Yeah,
you're not wrong.
We're not going to force the audience to sit through 3.5 months of us discussing this.
Please no. Phil texted me not long after we recorded our last episode, and we had jokingly said, "Yeah, let's jump in on the Stephen King train. Let's do a Salem's Lot," and copped to Salem's Lot being my favorite Stephen King. And I guess you just caught you picked up on the vampires thing and ran with it.
Well, I don't know if this is totally a surprise to you, but Stephen King's not a big YA author. He's written one novel, maybe 1.5, that could be construed as YA. Eyes of the Dragon and The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon sometimes slots nicely into that. But otherwise, he doesn't really fit our thesis.
No, a lot of his books are about kids of YA protagonist age.
Yes.
But then he kind of throws in like a car that wants to kill a boy's girlfriend and that sort of thing. and Christine is all well and good. I saw the movie for the first time relatively recently, and it absolutely rules. 10 out of 10. Everyone watch it. It's Stephen King, so there's some slurs, but
that's a shirt you should get. It's Stephen King, so there's some slurs. Stephen King loves having his villain characters not only be like murderers and kidnappers and clowns, but also be as racist as he wants them to be. He loves making his characters like weirdly racist. Like, I don't believe anyone's ever been as racist as a Stephen King villain.
Particularly the characters in It. Like the ones who hate Mike really hate Mike. But we're not talking. Yeah. We are not actually talking about Stephen King.
We're not talking about Stephen King, but you had said I love Salem's Lot. It's my favorite Stephen King novel.
Sure is.
I have just finished reading the entire Salem's Lot trilogy, the weird like Salem's Lot, Jerusalem's Lot, One for the Road novel and short stories, which I hadn't read Salem's Lot in years since I read it. Phenomenal novel, but that got me a thinking. What's the most Salem's Lot-esque YA series that we could really sink our teeth into?
Oh, I just want the vampire puns to come hard and fast and frequent. We're going to talk about the Twilight series.
We're gonna talk about the Twilight series from the incorrectly spelled first named author Stephenie Meyer herself. We are going to talk about Twilight, but before we get into them, before we begin the long trek through Twilight, we wanted to do kind of an intro episode.
Right.
Yeah,
this is not
partly
the first
because
time I've been in a podcast talking about Twilight, by the way. Go on.
This is not the first podcast to cover Twilight, by the way. Oh, did you know it was a popular series once upon a time?
It was, I don't know, because of your gender, because of your age, I don't know that you would have been quite as caught up in this phenomenon as I, a 20-year-old woman, was at the time.
Okay, but you also have to keep in mind that I was extremely online at that time as well.
That is true.
So while I wasn't the target demographic, I did have a child who was roughly that age, like young enough to like still be like have her ear to the pop cultural ground. But I actually read the first novel back in the day, just because I figured if I was going to give it a shake, I was going to give it a fair shake.
And you loved it. No, we'll get to that next.
We'll get to that. Notice I said I read the first novel back in the day.
I think an important caveat for this whole series for me will be that I loved these books. I loved these books so much. I didn't think that they were good. I just couldn't stop reading them. I was the stereotype. I did order the book, like the second book, shipped myself overnight the second I finished the first one. Because somebody was like, I'll lend you my copy, but it's at my mother's house. I'll have it to you in 3 days. That was too long. I had to read it then. New Moon is one of the worst books I've ever read, but I can't wait to read it again.
So you had it shipped as soon as it published, so you must have had the original UK Philosopher's Moon.
Oh, I wish. I wish I'd had the Philosopher's Moon. I wish. There are so many things then that came after that I didn't engage with, though, so I'm very excited to read me some Midnight Sun.
Yes.
Yeah.
But before we really get into Twilight talk, because, oh boy, we're going to have quite a few episodes to get into.
So much to say, but yes. Yeah,
let's talk about vampires. You like them?
Talk about how whenever I hear the word vampire, I think of the Buffy the Vampire Slayer episode Storyteller, in which one of the series' greatest characters, Andrew, says Slayer of the Vampires about 700 times.
As someone who has a horror adjacent podcast, I have been known to annoy my other co-host by insisting on pronouncing it Ouampire, no matter how many times I have to say it in the episode.
It's very what we do in the shadows of you to do.
Yeah. Hey, I was there first.
Yeah. Are you a vampire guy? Is this what we're getting at?
Oh God, I hope not. I guess I'm a vampire guy to the extent that, like, I read Salem's Lot when I was originally going through my Stephen King phase, even though it was one of those ones where I was like, I don't know if I really want to bother with this. What's interesting about vampires? But then I did read the first, 100 novels in the Anne Rice series.
First 100,
I was
yes.
minorly obsessed with those. And that was around the time the movie came out. So they were kind of having that push. And I was like, I'll dip my toe in this. And I was like, well, I got to find out what happens next. But that's kind of where those books, and I think Twilight too, it's mostly, I gotta find out what happens next. It's not that these characters are the most compelling people in the world, but just there's something else is about to happen. As opposed to Salem's Lot, which is a scary book. Like, it's a frightening novel about the horror of an infestation of vampires. And how a small town can disappear off the map and no one notices.
Yeah. So I realized in thinking about this for the past week, I'm a vampire gal apparently. Like, I could not narrow down my favorite vampire things to fewer than 10.
So my question for you then is, what is your definition, your base definition? What is it required for something to be a vampire?
I I feel like I'm working under the assumption that they're kind of Dracula-esque. Like, a lot of this, like, a lot of the basic rules, like, undead can only be killed by, I think, head cut off or stake through the heart. This is the traditional ones, right? Heads get yanked off in Twilight eventually, which is great, and we'll get to that. But creatures of the night can't come out during the day. Feed oftentimes unexclusively human blood, but more and more of the ones that I'm into, like that I got very attached to, especially when I was like a teenager and in my early 20s, they could feed on human or non-human blood if they were feeling particularly benevolent. In Twilight, they love to eat deer. It's just they simply
love to eat.
And
deer.
Like they in the Vampire Diaries, which is another favorite of mine, they get blood bags from hospitals, so it's not like, you know, they're not hunting. They're just sustaining themselves. Usually sexy. Often sexy. Like, not the Nosferatu style, more of the, like, I'd say it's popularized, obviously, more recently by things like Twilight, Vampire Diaries, Buffy, but also, like, older Dracula. Bela Lugosi isn't not hot, you know? Like, we're getting, dipping back in the archives there. But, how would you define them?
Well, I tend to go off. So I have read The Vampire, His Kith and Kin by Montague Summers. So I guess I am a little bit of a vampire guy because
you're a vampire guy.
That book is long and very, very dense and technical. Montague Summers was a scholar and a writer and a reverend and a weirdo and a cultist, maybe a pedophile, according to people who knew him. But in that, like, I'm a magician, man, kind of way. Who wrote in the late 19th, early 20th century. He was the first person to translate into English the Malleus Maleficarum, the witch hunter's guide. He wrote about witches and the history of witches and vampires and werewolves, especially from a scholarly standpoint, trying to like delve into the history, like where do these things come from? What are the worldwide legends about them? And had the bonus of he believed in this stuff. Montague Summers, like, these things were immediate, imminent threats to humanity, which is why he wrote about them and researched them. But his definitions of one thing he does, and actually the first Twilight mentions him when she's doing her research. She pulls up a quote from Montague Summers, and I was like, I know that guy.
That's what she's Googling vampires.
About vampire. What's a vampire? She's like trying to figure out.
I gotta know.
And what it comes down to for him is, vampire is really hard to define because the like vampire werewolf overlap historically is like so blurry that at times it's impossible to tell like what you're really talking about. The other one is most cultures that had a vampire myth, it's mostly a pop cultural myth. Like this wasn't something they believed in, but like these like researchers would come into villages and be like, here's a thing called a vampire. You got anything like this? And they'd be like, I guess, kind of. Like, we have this one thing we kind of talk about sometimes, and it's like, great. In this region of the mountains, here's what they call a vampire. So, like, it was kind of that. But Summers is basically like a vampire. You kind of whittle it down to a dead person who doesn't rot because they have the ability to feed on the blood of the living. Like, that's basically it. Everything beyond that was stuff that was just kind of like added later or like comes from different places or was created by Bram Stoker.
Well, yeah. So I was in New Orleans earlier this year, which means I did go on a tour where we walked by Anne Rice's house and got to see the crazy faux Gothic architecture that she insisted upon. Also the dog that lives across the street, who's a treat in a dream. Her name was Sugar, and she let us all pet her. New Orleans is the most wonderful city. Highly recommend it. Also went on like a ghost tour that was mostly debunking ghost and magic stories. And we did go see the house of the person that many, many people in, like, I think it was the 18 and early 1900s believed was a vampire. He would have very sexy parties. People would often end up
wait
missing.
In New Orleans?
In New Orleans, no less.
A sexy party?
This is a character that then popped up on the Vampire Diaries spinoff, The Originals, which is set in New Orleans. I will have more to say about the Vampire Diaries as we go, because it is very similar in tone to Twilight, but it also incorporates my favorite thing about vampire stories, which was, while I was thinking about this, I realized that every vampire, werewolf, assorted, like, classic monster story I love is about how terrible it is to be a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Twilight is about how wonderful it is to be a vampire at the end of the day. But, like, all of my favorites, like, I remember in the movie Underworld Evolution, which is going to be one of my weirder picks for favorite lore, the first time a werewolf tries to eat after he has been turned, he goes for a cheeseburger and gets it just has, like, the most violent illness of his life. Just, like, this is just, like, step one of how awful this is going to be.
Even though traditionally a werewolf isn't limited in what they can eat.
Oh, they just maybe he's a vampire. I haven't seen this.
I was going to say, they have a tendency to just murder their friends, but...
I just read a werewolf novel in which the character could not eat anything but meat anymore. So, like, you've got all kinds of... Oh, yeah. It is now my dream that Rachel Harrison will write a vampire story next, now that she has tackled werewolves and cryptids and witches and Satanism. She needs to move on to vampire now.
Well, one thing I loved about Salem's Lot, which, again, I hadn't read in a long time. I think I had seen the miniseries, the original miniseries.
Is it good?
Not that weird Rob Lowe miniseries. The original miniseries is phenomenal. It's a phenomenal miniseries. I am so surprised you haven't seen it.
I should watch it, yeah.
It's very different from the book, but it's very faithful in a lot of ways. Starsky and or Hutch plays the lead, one of the two, and he's very appropriate Stephen King lead. And they changed the nature of the vampires a little bit just because it has to be shortened. But one thing I loved about Salem's Lot, the book, is that the vampires, he really plays into the whole, beyond the head vampire, the minions are essentially incorporeal spirits who can take on, like, mass and weight in order to feed, but they are essentially just air. Like, they can float away if need be. And there's something very eerie and, like, ghost-like about.
Yeah, I was gonna say they're very spectral in that story, which is my favorite vampire gang is the vampires in Near Dark. Yeah. And while they do not turn into ghosts, they are all disposable. No matter how well you get to know them, you have the thought all along, these guys aren't going to be around forever, even though they're supposed to be around forever. Now, that's a great vampire movie if you love Bill Paxton.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't love Bill Paxton?
So good in that movie. That's a weirdly, like, not a stacked cast, but a lot of people you think, oh, hey, I love this guy whenever he's on screen. So
just don't go in expecting The Lost Boys. It's not The Lost Boys.
Oh no, Near Dark is shot like a literal, like, teenage dream. Like, it's so fuzzy. Yeah. It has the score is by Tangerine Dream. It's directed by Catherine Patterson many, many years before she became a mainstream director, and it's ethereal. It has a lot of the, like, it's a gender flip from something like Twilight. Like, the vampire is a woman, and the boy who falls in love with her is like a farm boy whose father is a veterinarian for horses. And there are blood transfusions of different kinds in this one where, like, he is brought back to life by horse blood. Look, if you haven't seen Near Dark, it is hard to see it, but I recommend seeking it out anyway.
Hard to see it because it's not available in many places.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, I went to a late night screening of a bad 35mm print at a local theater, which is the kind of thing I do more often than exactly as often as you would think.
I was going to say.
It happens a lot. Yeah, vampires.
But then you have Lost Boys, which is sort of another. It's an angsty love story vampire who, you know, like, do I want to join this group? I'll lose my humanity, but I will live forever and be with the girl of my dreams. But King's vampires were very much, you become a vampire, you lose almost your entire personality. The only vestiges of you have enough of your personality left in order to trick the people close to you in order to feed off of them. But you may as well, you are an undead soul. You have no
you're
personality.
A murdery guy. It's not like I also like, I like a cozy vampire. I think Let the Right One In is the closest that comes to that, where it's just a cute little kid. Do they have to kill people? Yes. Is that a big part of their whole life? Not really.
Well, only because she has an adult slave who goes out and gets bodies.
That works out really well for her, though.
She does leap on one of the unfortunate villagers in the middle of a tunnel, which is horrifying.
Yeah, I mean, that's pretty cool, though. You know,
there are a bunch of CGI cats who attack a woman at one point.
I think it's been a while since I've seen Let the Right One In. You're listing a lot of things. I remember the leaping. I do not remember the cats.
You remember the friendship between the kids. You forget how toxic the friendship is and that the boy is a borderline sociopath.
The boy is, there's no question about that. Like, also, like, I really love Rainbow Rowell, the YA author, who's written some very gutting, like, cerebral stuff, but she's also written what is basically like novel-length Draco Harry fanfic, but with some fairly significant tweaks. A series called Carry On that is about a boy wizard and his vampire love interest. And that's one where they try to bury she doesn't try very hard to bury the lead on the vampire thing, but it is one that it is about. It is both very cozy and very fun to read, and it is also about how terrible it is to be a vampire. So I automatically love it.
Now, I've read, and we covered briefly in It's Del Toro Time, the Guillermo del Toro, Chuck Hogan, The Strain novel series, which are bad. About as bad as you could hope for a vampire novel to be, about what if vampires, but also they poop while they eat. So that's that's a big part of their vampire lore. Is the vampires, they feed, but then they excrete constantly the parts of the blood they don't need, but you can only see it with luminol. So like that's how you find where the vampires have been, is you shine luminol around and you see their excretions all over the walls. But they're also just monsters. They don't have personalities. They are Del Toro vampires, like in Blade 2. Their faces open up and their long tongue comes out, and they're creatures as opposed to sort of like uncanny people. And for me, I was gonna say, and for me, a vampire to be truly effective needs to have that uncanny quality. That like, is this still the person I knew? Almost like a zombie. Like I recognize this person. If their face is falling apart and like the giant tongues are coming out, I'm like, well, that's just a monster now. That could be anything. Right.
That's just a venom that you're describing.
That is a venom. We got ourselves a venom. It is a venom. It's very much a venom.
Yeah, I'm realizing, aside from Salem's Lot, because yes, you have the uncanny quality is certainly there. They are more monstrous than everything else on my list, but they're still like, they can be recognizable as people.
I still can't believe you haven't seen the miniseries. You've got to see the miniseries. It's only 3 hours long.
It's not that long for a King miniseries.
Toby Hooper.
That's not long for a King miniseries at all. I've seen Stephen King's The Shining.
I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Bonus episode. The other thing. I mean, there's two things, because like, What We Endure in the Shadows does not fit in any other vampire canon at all. It is just a farce. The film, I would still argue that, like, on average, the movie is always going to be better than the TV show. I think the movie is darn near perfect. But the TV show has done a very good job of sketching out just how stupid a vampire could be in a modern context. And setting it on Staten Island is just an inspired choice. But the only other thing on my list is Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Angel. And I'm going to go ahead and say there's no way Stephenie Meyer is not a fan.
Okay, so
she's going to say that she's not.
I'm going to get into this. We need to get into this when we talk about the actual novel. But in the lead up to this, yes, the Buffy Angel thing was like such a cultural phenomenon. Mm-hmm. Like back in the day, you could buy the Buffy Angel episodes as a pack of VHS tapes. Like they sold
it's the same thing as like you could buy the VHS X-Files like myth arc set,
yeah,
or by Monster of the Week ones.
Right. So if you just wanted to see the important Buffy Angel episodes, you could spend, I don't know how much it was, like $500 for like 8 video
so
tapes.
Expensive.
And that made, but it was everyone was talking about it. It was will they, won't they? Is he evil? Is he not? Which caused me to be shocked and weirded out and surprised when people got mad at this new book called Twilight that came out, because the vampires were romantic and it was about, and they weren't evil. They were, they were trying to avoid the blood drinking thing. Cause I was like, this is a well-tread ground. Like this was nothing new at all.
No, all the vampires you get to know well in Buffy have inner conflict about their vampireness. They also are just as emotional as the humans surrounding them, if not more so in some cases. Like I think Angel is a better show than Buffy. The less said about that, the better, because it's a wild statement to make, and I don't know why I just said it out loud. I don't think Angel is a very interesting character. He is a moody boy.
He is a moody boy.
Spike is a fascinating character, in part because he went from being a moody boy to being like a faux, like Billy Idol, devil may care vampire, to like comes all the way back around to being a better romantic hero than Angel.
Yes, a more interesting character because he is the character Joss Whedon hated and wanted off the show.
It's so... like, just, I mean, the Whedon of it all is really interesting, right? Because, like, eventually Angel, well, not even eventually, Angel very quickly becomes David Fury's baby, and it's part of why it's such a better show eventually. And then when Whedon gets, like, pretty disconnected from Buffy, Jaina Spenson takes over a lot of it, and that becomes a better show. But it is because they center emotion to some extent. I don't get into recommending video essays that often, but
are you going to bring up the Sarah Zed? Are you going to bring up Sarah Zed's?
The Sarah Zed
that was great.
Particularly the Sarah Zed essay about season 6 of Buffy is really worth watching, particularly if you're a person who fell off of Buffy because 5 has this incredible finale set up, and then they're like, but what if we do 2 more?
Or if you are someone like me who loved the season finale of 5 and adored season 6 as it was happening because it was such a nightmare.
6 is, I mean, like, best musical episode in the history of television.
But I also just love taking our characters to the lowest points of their lives.
Oh yes, and making the villains actual monsters in a way that the others were not is just it's a really good choice. But yeah, I mean, I think a thing that happened culturally, because like as I've already said, I loved Twilight, I loved Buffy at the same time, and recognized that like Buffy is a better product. Like this is just a better piece of media all around. But there was this weird tendency to pit the two against each other. And that's something I found, I didn't find it all that interesting at the time. It was like, you can like 2 things. I've always believed that. Yeah. But there was this weird root of like, I remember buying a friend a t-shirt that said, and then Buffy staked Edward, the end.
I was just going to bring that one up.
Yeah, retrospect, Buffy wouldn't have staked Edward. Buffy would
That's what I keep saying. I was just going to say.
Yeah.
Like, why would Buffy even stake Edward? She literally fell in love with a nice guy vampire. Like that was the whole point of the show.
Edward.
Yeah, she fell in love with a moody boy who watched her sleep, was way older than this high school student. And at least Edward looks like a high school student. Angel looks like your best friend's dad from episode 1.
And not in the way where you develop a crush usually. He just like,
no.
I could go on about Buffy all day, but I do need to throw in the anecdote of David Boreanaz being cast in that role because a casting director's friend said, there's a guy who walks his dog in my neighborhood and I bet he's Union. Because she saw a handsome man, like a friend saw a handsome man and was like, you're just looking for a hunk, right?
But I don't know. The David Boreanaz thing never made any sense to me. I always thought he looked kind of like a confused, like gas station attendant. Like he does.
Oh, I don't think he's like. I didn't think he was any great shakes. And also, it's not the same as an Edward versus Jacob, right? Because Spike is infinitely more interesting than Jacob, who's we'll get into him.
We'll get into it, but should white people write native characters?
There's going to be a strong argument made for no, they should not over the course of this. Speaking of Stephen King, there's just people who should maybe avoid it at all costs. But
has Stephen King ever written native characters?
Not really. He tends to.
He avoids almost everything people associate Stephen King with, like Native American wise, was stuff added for movies
and burial grounds.
And
the only thing that's like and it's also a made up tribe in Pet Sematary. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. The Micmac tribe.
But Pet Sematary, of course, wasn't an Indian burial ground. It was a place that the natives were smart enough not to bury anyone in. They were like, yeah, we just avoid this place. Like that's it. Like that's it's yeah.
We don't put our cats in that soil because they come back wrong, and you're gonna find that out soon when you decide to put your cat in this soil.
Let's make a whole movie about why Judd Crandall told the guy to bury his cat in the burial ground, even though the book does a pretty good job of explaining it in a few paragraphs, which is if you bury something there, you are then compelled to spread the disease. Like that's it. The book is just like, yeah, you are psychically compelled to then share the Pet Sematary with other people.
It's so weird to think about like Stephen King as somebody who's good at economy of storytelling just because he's like he doesn't do that anymore. But I'm thinking like I just want to talk about the book so badly, but like there's the critiques levied against Twilight at the time it came out aren't the ones I would make now, and we'll get there.
We'll get there.
Yeah.
But my goal for this is to approach Twilight now. It's years later. No one cares anymore. There's not even like a new book that has a movie. There's not even a Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes coming out.
What if they announce one while we're doing this?
Then we're all set. Then we're all set. Who
I realize
would it be about?
Wasn't really, that is not what happened with the last one, but it sort of felt like that's what happened.
Who is the minor Twilight character who would get their Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes?
Oh my goodness. Actually, a Volturi origin story is the only thing I'd be interested in, specifically the Dakota Fanning character.
Or the dad. Like, just
which
Charlie.
One? Charlie or Carlisle?
Charlie. No, Charlie. What's his story? Like,
Mustache
they did they did a prequel novel about Hopper from Stranger Things.
Well, that's stupid.
Even though and so you kind of find out that there's kind of always been weird things going on in that town, and maybe Mustache Dad like had some like experiences with werewolves and vampires in his childhood.
My kingdom for a book about Mustache Dad that's just about like him meeting Bella's mom.
Yeah.
Nothing supernatural about it. Just a nice little love story that ends in sadness.
The use of the term Mustache Dad also is me going, I want to approach this trying to look at it through like sort of clear eyes. Like, okay, getting rid of all the in-jokes.
To separate it from the riff tracks of it all. Yeah.
Yeah. I am not, okay, you announced that Angel's a better show than Buffy. I am going to announce that I am not a huge fan of riff tracks. I find riff tracks to kind of at times be the more mean-spirited cousin of Mystery Science Theater. I like Mike Nelson a lot. I like the other two guys a lot, but I find the writing on the riff tracks to sometimes be like desperate for a joke. And I felt like a lot of their Twilight stuff was making fun of what the movie actually was trying to be, which is something for young adults and teens. And I was like, I don't know, like the first, I mean, I haven't seen it in a while, but the first Twilight movie I think holds up.
It's like Catherine Hardwicke movie, and it's not bad.
Yeah.
Like,
but we'll get there.
Another will get there, but none of the movies are great. I don't think any of them are as terrible as people think.
And of course, to discuss Twilight, it's going to be impossible not to at least tread onto the 50 Shades of Grey of it all.
Yeah, I wondered about that.
Movies which... books and much worse books, but movies which also follow the The first one is kind of an artistic attempt at adapting a piece of writing by a woman that then gets taken away and handed off to a bunch of men in a boardroom because those women filmmakers, they insist on a little too much control.
Another video essay recommendation, Folding Ideas series on the 50 Shades adaptations. Exceptional. I've been watching a lot of YouTube lately, it would seem.
Yeah, well, I have to recommend Sarah Zed's channel. They do some pretty insightful video essays, only like once every like 4 months. So
I mean, it's a better rate than some. Like, although.
No, I'm saying it's a good rate because it's not like one a week where you're like, all right, what else do I have to talk about?
This is not germane, but the fact that H-Bomber Guy swooped back in with a 4-hour video did feel like a robust apology that he was making, and I accept it.
H-Bomber Guy and Todd in the Shadows coming in on top of each other with like the same videos. Hi, everybody. This is YouTube Talk with Christy and Phil, where we talk about YouTube stuff that we try to keep secret because no one needs to know that I'm a 47-year-old man who watches a bunch of 20 and 30-somethings discussing popular culture.
Oh, doesn't it make you feel old the second they allude to their actual age? I hate it so much.
It makes me feel older when I realize they're getting older and are no longer like young people anymore. And I'm like, but I was already old when you were young, and now you're old, and now I'm very old.
Hey, you know what doesn't get old? Vampires.
I was thought you were gonna say the nostalgia critic, but no, it's vampires.
Vampires. I think the part where they're beautiful came in a little later in the mythos, right?
Vampires? Well, yeah. We have the Carmilla thing.
That's and Carmilla is a thing that I want to like. Twilight is an aggressively non-queer text. And there is like there's queer subtext to a lot of older vampire lore. There's quite a bit like it's sprinkled throughout like the homoeroticism of like Anne Rice. The vampires are like more sexually fluid in something like even a Vampire Diaries.
Right, because vampires, their form of intimacy is blood drinking, and they don't actually care if you're a male or a female. It's just easier for them to get in to the boudoir of someone of the opposite sex half the time. But it's also easy to get close to your friends. So if you are friends with a man and you are a male vampire, then go for it, because
this is something that What We Do in the Shadows is very good about, both lampooning and normalizing, where Laszlo Cravensworth, played by Matt Berry, maybe the best comedic performance on television right now. I think there's a strong argument to be made there. Is like just he's Dionysus. He's like a pleasure god, and he loves his wife so much, but also he and one of the best friends he lives with will just allude to their sexual relationship that is never pictured on screen, but apparently pretty active, which I'm very fond of. And then like you have Twilight, which is. It's so interesting that like the Mormon background being as obvious as it is, in contrast with other writers who are Mormons, because we have kind of a weirdly high number of popular fiction writers who are.
Yeah, and the Mormon stuff, I mean, it's about as important to the overall arc of Twilight as Stephen King's weird, like, what is he, Protestant? Like his weird Christianity, like that pops up all the time. Salem's Lot being an explicitly religious novel, like a "you are only saved through the power of Christ" novel.
And when he's trying not to write about it, it becomes obvious that he wants to anchor it to that and just.
I mean, the whole point of Salem's Lot is you can't fight off the vampires unless you totally believe in the power of the cross. Like it's right there in the text.
Pretty good. Good
job. And he, but I mean, once understand that about a writer, I mean, horror is steeped in conservatism and religion. Like that's that's part and parcel with most of the genres of horror, and vampires are no exception. Especially when you get into the whole like crosses and holy water and throw a communion wafer at them, you really can't avoid that. But and even when you try to go for something a little more secular, like a Lost Boys type or even a Twilight type, it's still right there dancing around the edges.
I mean, Twilight has this theme of abstinence that is pervasive throughout the text, but I also don't think that's the most interesting thing about Twilight. It's just there. I mean, there are writers who are able to like remove their own religious background and like current practices from their writing fairly well. Stephenie Meyer's writing still skews toward this very, if not conservative, but really traditional kind of worldview. It's a lot to talk about. I think these are also just more complex than people think they are. Like, I don't think they're not the most tightly edited books in the world. The structure is a little odd. It's a little off-putting.
I think I said to you, because I've been rereading Twilight now, and it could be called Interviews with a Vampire, because most of the book so far is literally just Bella and Edward sitting down and having a conversation, which they do go on a little long. It is in need of an editor. These books are a lot longer than you remember them being.
Oh, they're so long.
But it is that sort of like, let's play in this area where what if a vampire... A lot of the criticisms levied at the book series, and we'll get into this when we discuss the books themselves, are to me fascinating, because she's really approaching this as, you're an undead monster that's trying to learn how to relate to a child, like a teenager. How do you navigate that world? Oh, but he seems so creepy and aggressive, and he's a bad boyfriend. Yeah, he's a vampire who's undead and hasn't been allowed to be friends with anybody in, however many decades it's been. So I find that approach, yeah, he's a bad boyfriend but he's trying to figure out how to not be one. Like,
right. That's part of why I'm excited to talk about it, because there are these bad boyfriend aspects, but I also can fully understand and did identify with why he was the perfect boyfriend.
Yes.
Is there anything a teenage girl wants more than someone to listen to her and validate that her problems are actual problems, and to just allow like somebody who allows you to talk at them for hours on end? It's not like he has anything better to do, and he thinks you're pretty. Like, this is the dream. I'm going to regress entirely into my 20-year-old self when we talk about these. Like,
but it's also that a lot of the critiques against them are completely parallel with the same critiques that came against 50 Shades at the time. Just the ones for Twilight were directed at teenagers, and the ones at 50 Shades at women in their 30s, which is that weird gatekeepy, oh, this is bad for teenage girls to read because they're going to think this is what a positive relationship is, in the same way that people levied at 50 Shades, which is, this is bad for women to read because they're going to think this is what a real kinky relationship is. Leaving aside the fact that women and girls are human beings with intelligence who are able to discern the difference between reality and fiction, and are allowed to have their own fantasies that maybe aren't the healthiest things in real life, but are healthy to have as fantasies.
For sure. It's very fun. Yeah. I like the idea of ping-ponging from the Hunger Games mindset to the Twilight mindset, because Hunger Games do have appeal to adults. Like, reading those in my 30s was just as arresting as it was to read them as a college student. The Twilight books are not written for grown-ups. Nope. This is not there, and that's not a critique. That's a statement of fact. Like, these are not high-minded. These are not just war theory, right? Like, this is not playing to some greater like societal meaning. I'm going to see Songbirds and Snakes again tonight. Don't judge me for this. It just seems like the right thing for me to do. No, who would judge me for seeing a pretty good movie twice in the theater when my first experience was suboptimal?
What are you going to go see? Wish? Like, nobody wants to go see Wish.
Is there no other movies are in the theater, right? Like I can't even think of anything. Maybe there's a sequel to something or some such. Oh, there's a Marvel movie, right?
I don't even know if it's still playing.
It might not be. What a bummer for them and no one else. I'm really very much looking forward to like being immersed in that world again. And that movie doesn't, as much as there were a lot of teens in the audience, that is one that there's so much cross-generation appeal in that.
Yeah.
I don't know of anybody who's like earnestly rereading the Twilight novels. Being like, well, as an adult revisiting them, there's this whole other layer. I don't think there is a whole other layer. And I think
I know two people who are going to be saying that.
We've talked about this.
Right, which isn't to not denigrate the notion of young adult romance, which is a very popular and very valid genre. It does not need to have the layers of Suzanne Collins. Suzanne Collins put a love triangle into her novels almost grudgingly, or if nothing else, as a symbol of the different war philosophies going on. Whereas Stephenie Meyer put a love triangle in her novels because that's what they are about. They are about a will they, won't they, who is she going to end up with? And that's fine. That's why they exist. I had the pleasure of overhearing two women at work the other day on Sunday at the bookstore where I work, talking about the Twilight novels and mentioning that one of the women was like, well, I was really only into them because, the whole Team Edward, Team Jacob thing. And then she was like, her friend was like, well, what were you? Team Edward, Team Jacob? And she's like, oh, I'm not even going to tell you. It's too embarrassing. Where I was like, well, it's one or the other. And they're both fairly embarrassing. So you may as well say. But then they started talking later on. They came back around and they were talking about the Hunger Games because we had Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes out on display. And she was like, oh, I was really into Hunger Games as well for exactly the same reason. And I was like, well,
that's fascinating to me.
It's not like she was a teenager and being like, well, I was into Hunger Games because I'm really into the just war theory. I had read a lot of academic articles about just war and wanted to see how that would play out in the milieu of a YA novel. No, of course, it appeals to kids. That's why it was there. And Suzanne Collins knew how to get her foot in the door by writing it as a young adult romance. And Stephenie Meyer's like, I'm just going to write a young adult romance, throw some vampires into it.
Yeah, I do like this is not shoehorned. This is the point of the books is the love triangle. The point of the books is actually the Edward Bella love story, and any roadblock we can set up for that. Poor Jacob is not really a character. He gets a little bit to do in Breaking Dawn, and Breaking Dawn. We'll see.
And he established the career of current movie superstar. What is the guy's name who played
Taylor Lautner?
Taylor Lautner.
It is also, I'm very excited to talk about the performances in these movies and what they later led to, because oh man, Robert Pattinson's career becomes so fascinating after this, and him being so stuck in these movies for as long as they were had a stronger impact on his psyche than it did his career in the long run.
And Taylor Lautner just eventually being like, I just want to spend time with my family.
Taylor loves his wife Taylor.
Yeah.
And his ex-girlfriend Taylor Swift.
And Taylor Dane, I don't know who did.
He loves anyone else? Taylor is what Taylor,
that's it.
Here.
That's his one personality trait.
That's true.
So what we were talking about was covering the Twilight books and movies. I believe the idea right now is we're going to do movie and book at the same time. Wasn't that it? Yes.
I think that's a good idea.
So that we're not so long.
Yeah.
Also, we're going like we did with Hunger Games. We will be covering the parodies, the satires, the jokes, the joke-em-ups. Did you know that vampires sparkle? That's funny. We can point that out for an hour and a half and make a whole movie about it.
Are you excited for Vampires Suck? Because that's what I'm really looking forward to.
I would be lying if I said yes.
Fair. Yeah, I mean, we have a lot to dig into. We have 4 books. We have 5 movies.
Yep.
And then we have everything, all the ancillary material that comes after, because there were multiple books after.
There were.
There's like an interesting publication history to do with something like Midnight Sun. The publication history of the first 4 books couldn't be more straightforward, but that is also fun to talk about in a way.
And then, of course, the host.
Yeah. I had not thought about Twilight in any serious way in a very long time. I'm excited to think about it with a pretty high level of frequency, and just opening it on my Kindle, seeing that first page about how much she hates Forks, Washington. Oh boy, did that feel like coming back home to me.
Your Bella moment.
Yes.
Will the question that was on everyone's mind, will teenage girls get into a book series about a teenage girl who is just like them? Turns out, yeah, they will. Well, right. Should we bring this to a close? I think we should. I have therapy, and I'm gonna obviously talk about Twilight for the next hour. So just to see if I can contextualize it for myself. Good.
Yeah.
Well, what should we say goodbye to this week?
I was going to say Sparkles, but we haven't gotten into Sparkles yet, really.
We haven't gotten into... Let's say goodbye to Salem's Lot and hello to Forks.
I like that idea. Goodbye, Salem's Lot.
Yep, you were named after a pig. People forget that it's named after a pig.
They really do. They do.
Pig named Jerusalem. Anyway, goodbye, everyone.
Goodbye.